Okay, so I'm Jennie Duckworth, and I'm here with my colleague Jennie Bellamy, and we're both from the School of Environment, Earth and Ecosystem Sciences at the Open University. And we're going to talk about some work we carried out with another colleague, Harriet Marshall, who isn't here today. And our talk's entitled, Does Sharing Slides in Advance of Online Learning Events Impact Student Attendance? Next slide, please. So, I think as we all know, engagement with learning events, and in this context, we mean tutorials, which at the OU are basically sort of 1 to 1.5 hour online sessions led by a tutor, and they're generally quite interactive in nature. Engagement with tutorials is key to student learning and also can reduce isolation on online modules. It provides a point of contact between tutors and students to students as well. Access to slides in advance of online tutorials is thought to benefit many learners, such as those with declared and undeclared disabilities, but also students, for example, who have English as an additional language. However, we didn't know how sharing slides in advance actually impacts tutorial attendance at the OU. Looking at the literature, now the literature tends to focus on traditional lectures at face-to-face institutions. However, it can still give us an insight. It seems to give quite a mixed picture with both positive, as in sharing materials in advance encourages attendance, and negative impacts. So we wanted to explore this some more. Next slide, please. So our project aims were firstly to establish existing online tutorial slide sharing practice amongst our tutors in terms of both how and when they shared slides with students. Now, at the OU, a tutor plays a very key role in supporting learning. They support a group typically of about 20 students. They mark their assignments, they're the first port of call, and they also run tutorials. And tutors either run tutorials with their what's known as tutor group, which is this group of up to 20, approximately 20 students. And sometimes we can combine the tutor group into a cluster of tutor groups, and you'll get tutors running a tutorial for a group of tutor groups, which could be up to 200 students, but we rarely get that many. So that's just a bit of terminology. We also wanted to establish the existing practice of our students in terms of how they access and use online tutorial slides in advance. We wanted to identify the perceived benefits of and barriers to sharing and accessing slides in advance of tutorials. And we wanted to get the perspective from both tutors and students. And all this, we wanted to get the information forward so that we could inform and develop recommendations on good practice in slide sharing. Next slide, please. So we focused on 3 modules in the School of Environment, Earth and Ecosystem Sciences, 1 module at level 4, 1 at level 5, and 1 at level 6. Firstly, we carried out an initial analysis of tutor slide sharing practice, and we based this on the 2022 to 2023 academic year. Tutors commonly share slides through what are known as tutor group and cluster forums. Now, the forums are discussion forums that are part of the VLE on a module, and it's where students interact with each other and interact with their tutors, and it's a way you can upload slides. So we wanted to do that to establish existing practice. We also carried out online surveys of approximately 2,000 students across the 3 modules and 100 tutors who tutor these modules. And we did this based on the 2023 to 2024 academic year. And then we carried out a focus group discussion with some members of the student support team. The OU's student support teams are the first port of call that students go to looking for support. And they offer advice in all sorts of situations. But we wanted to get from them whether they were getting queries or concerns raised from students regarding availability of slides. Next slide, please. So firstly, looking at existing practice of slide sharing via forums. So the graphs on the right, the graph above is for tutor group tutorials, these small group tutorials, and the one below is for cluster tutorials. I should just say this is based on a random sample of between a third and a half of the tutors on each module. And we looked at 3 tutor group and 2 to 3 cluster tutorials per module to give us a flavour of what's going on. The blue bars are when slides were shared in advance. The orange are when slides were shared afterwards, and the grey are when slides weren't shared via the forum. So what you can see is you can see a fair bit of grey, and this is slides not being shared in advance. But on the leftmost graph and the rightmost graph, which show a similar pattern, when slides were shared, they did tend to be shared mainly in advance. And we think this might reflect the module team guidance, because the module on the very left and the one on the very right, where there are quite a high proportion where slides are shared in advance, the module teams did actually request that tutors share slides in advance, whereas the middle one, where very few are shared in advance, there wasn't such guidance given. A bit of a caveat is that we know that not all tutors do share slides via forums. Some share by email instead. Next slide, please. So in our surveys, we asked the tutors when they shared their tutorial slides, how they shared them if they were sharing them in advance, and what they considered the benefits were to sharing slides in advance, both from a tutor and a student perspective. And also, what did they consider the challenges and disadvantages to sharing slides in advance? Next slide, please. So firstly, when do you share slides? The left-hand graph here. As you can see, the majority of tutors shared them at one or more days before, and some the same day but before. We had quite a good response rate, 41 out of 100 tutors. But of course, we do need to bear in mind that it's possible that the tutors who responded are those who do share slides in advance. Sharp-eyed amongst you might notice that the percentages add up to more than 100. This is because we did allow more than one response. It's possible, for example, that a tutor shared slides in advance on one tutorial, but didn't on another. And then on the right-hand graph, the majority of, this is how do you share them? The majority of respondents did share them on the relevant forum. However, some did do it by email, either to the whole group or maybe to selected students. For example, those who have a flag on their records for a disability and need slide sharing in advance as a reasonable adjustment. Next slide, please. So when we asked tutors about sharing slides in advance, they did raise some concerns. One which frequently came up is that students are less likely to attend if they get slides in advance. They might just take the slides, think job done, and move on. And also that if they do just look at the slides without actually participating in the tutorial, they might not get the whole picture. The slides don't really stand up on their own. Also, time management issue, it's just not always convenient. They might not have the time to prepare the slides early. And particularly for tutorials which involve some calculation exercises, a concern that students can see the answers. However, on the flip side, they could also see some advantages. For example, one tutor told a tale of a student telling them, "I just wish all tutors would do that, and it should be standard expected practice from all our tutors. Quite a few OU tutors also work at another HEI, and it was commented, this is just normal practice at my other HEI. And they had workarounds for the issue of potentially giving away the answers, like I remove the slides with answers to questions and solutions to maths problems before I share them in advance. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Jennie, who's going to talk about the student perspective. Thanks. And next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Jenny. So now we're going to think about the student survey and the sorts of things that the students told us. We asked the students about awareness of slide sharing and where they'd go to look for the slides. We asked what they'd do with them. We offered choices like save and read them in advance, have in front of you for an event, use the slides afterwards, adding notes, or write notes during the event. We also asked whether having the slides would affect their attendance, why they access the slides, and we asked them to identify any other benefits as well. So what did they say? Next slide, please. So here we've got the student survey answers, just a few quotes. 146 students answered the survey. We undertook a very superficial thematic analysis on the answers to identify themes. So we found reassurance and preparedness was one of the main themes, accessibility and disability as well, practical advantages, and participating during live events. So you can see some of the quotes here linked to that. So reducing anxiety, easier to take notes, also accessibility software, being able to prepare and feel more prepared, also linked to specific disabilities, neurodivergences, and so on. There were also a few disadvantages noted. So one student pointed out that it's just a set of bullet points, and maybe we need to make it clearer why we share the slides, that it's not a substitute for attending. And also, interestingly, that it creates at least a temptation to avoid lectures, as they say, what we would call tutorials or learning events. Next slide, please. So now some charts. A reassuringly large majority of students who responded said that they found accessing the slides in advance useful. And importantly, a similarly large majority said accessing slides in advance does not affect their attendance. Interestingly, the second most popular response about attendance was that it would actually mean they were more likely to attend. This was presumably because having the slides meant they felt more prepared, allowed them to prepare questions, for example, and it also reduced anxiety, other issues around mental health challenges, and so on. Also, you can imagine if you were a student whose first language isn't English, then having the slides would help a lot, as Jenny already mentioned. This does seem to bear this out. We found that a lot of the free text style questions allowed students to mention issues around neurodivergence and other sensory impairments and so on. So that was quite pleasing. Next slide, please. I mentioned just now that we asked the students what they do with the slides if they do access them in advance. And a lot of those who replied said that they would save and print them and read through them in advance. They would have them in front of them for the event. They would review them with the recording of the tutorial, adding notes. Those were the most popular answers to this. Now, students could tick any of these that applied, but it wasn't that it was this sort of group of 40 who ticked all of them. There was a mixture of different students who were responding to this question. Next slide, please. So next, we organised a focus group with our student support team colleagues. Most of them were educational advisors, but I think there was another member of staff as well. They work with STEM students, and they identified that having the slides in advance would help students to feel prepared and to reduce anxiety. So similar messages to those that we were receiving from the students themselves. They also, the support team staff, they always also wanted to be able to give accurate information and be able to say that the slides would be available. Ideally, in a similar place at similar times for all modules that a student might be undertaking. So, for example, they would always be available 2 days in advance on a cluster forum or something like that. One concern that the student support team did voice to us was that there might be a small number of students who could overthink this issue, and they might try to over prepare, devoting an awful lot of time to preparing for a tutorial and almost creating for themselves a sort of flipped learning scenario. So that was an understandable concern. Next slide, please. So in summary, our key findings are that at the moment there's a rather inconsistent practice when it comes to slide sharing ahead of learning events. We feel that students benefit from having the slides in advance. Students report that having them in advance increases the likelihood of attending for a small number of students, but certainly doesn't seem to mean that they don't want to attend. And having slides in advance also is welcomed by our student support team colleagues. Next slide, please. So we have a few recommendations as well, that all students should be able to access slides in advance, not just those students, for example, who have a flag linked to a disability. That module leaders should set clear expectations with the tutors about where and how and when the slides should be shared. That it's fine to make available a basic set of slides, so without the answers, for example, or with a more of an overview about what the learning event is going to consist of, that this would be just as useful for students. And we'd like the Open University consider a reminder system linked to the tutorial booking system, so that associate lecturers, our tutors, get a reminder to tell them to share the slides a couple of days before the event is about to happen. And we'd really like also the university to aim for consistency across different schools, different qualifications, and so on. Next slide, please. So what's been happening since all of this has been going on? We've presented our findings to various Open University-wide scholarship and learning and teaching events. We've also shared our findings with various schools in the STEM faculty, including groups of tutors, and they've mainly been responding in a very positive way. A few have said that they'll change their practice based on our findings, in particular that students aren't put off attending events. We've been seeking feedback from the module teams in our school where we've already been implementing these recommendations, and that's been mainly positive as well. And here we are talking to you today. So just before we finish, another big thank you on the record to Harriet as well, the third member of our team who couldn't be here today, and also to Esteem, who are the STEM Scholarship Centre at the Open University. So over to you. Any questions or comments?